Welcome back, everybody. My name is Tucker, and today is the second season preview of the offseason, the first in the Eastern Conference, and it's for the Chicago Bulls. This is a team that finished with a 22-60 record last year, which was fourth worst in the league, and their win total has actually decreased in each of the last 5 seasons, but there is some reason for optimism. Before we get to that, though, one side note, I'm not convinced that Jim Boylen, the coach that replaced Fred Hoiberg last season and has seemingly received an extension from the Bulls like 5 different times, is going to be the right coach for this team. Remember, this is the guy that had his players essentially boycotting his practice habits at times last season. But outside of that, there are some things to like. There are 6 lottery picks on the roster and in the rotation, 3 of which were drafted by Chicago, being Lauri Markkanen, Wendell Carter Jr, and Coby White, and 3 of which were traded for after playing for another team, being Kris Dunn, Zach Lavine, and Otto Porter Jr. Now, certainly just having lottery picks doesn't mean anything, but all of these players range from usable to potential all-stars, which is a good foundation for the Bulls to build upon. As we look now at the offseason, there are some important additions and subtractions to look at for this team. The first of which is Coby White, who they selected in the first round of the draft, and I really like him as a player, and I was surprised that the Bulls were able to get him at number 7. I thought a team would potentially move up in front of them, but that didn't happen. White fits in extremely well. He excels in transition, and as a playmaker, he should be able to set up some of these other really good young players on the roster, and even though size and defense could be an issue, especially in a long-term backcourt scenario alongside Lavine, he could realistically follow a De'Aaron Fox-like rise through his first few seasons in the league if things go right. Next, another draft selection is Daniel Gafford, and there's not much to say here. He's a second-round pick. I don't want to read too much into this. He should get some good backup 5 minutes throughout the season, and we'll just kind of see where things go from there for him. Next is Thaddeus Young, who is a player that they brought in free agency that personally I wasn't a huge fan of, simply because of the contract that he signed, but from an on-court perspective, he should provide good veteran leadership that should be really helpful for this team. He's a good two-way player and should, in theory, help the development of guys like Lauri Markkanen and Wendell Carter Jr., which is honestly the most valuable thing that he can provide to this team. I'm not sure that he moves the needle a ton for this team, but I do get why they signed him. Next, another free agency acquisition, and it's Thomas Satoransky. He's been really good in replacement of John Wall at times in Washington and should be a good 6th-man type point guard as they develop White into the point guard of the future. He's a good playmaker that'll set up the better offensive players on the roster, and again, is just a guy that you like to have around some of these other younger players to make sure that they're being put in positions to be successful. The only other point to make here, and this is something that I'm going to talk about later on, is that this basically ends the Kris Dunn as the point guard of the future thing in Chicago, the combination of this signing as well as the drafting of White, but again, I'll get to that later. Now, in terms of the subtractions category, there's really nothing to talk about apart from losing Robin Lopez. Not a huge loss. He didn't fit the timeline, and Gafford should be able to take up a good amount of his minutes at the 5 spot, and then Thaddeus Young can take up some of those minutes at the backup 5 as well. Not a huge loss, especially considering the front court talent on the younger side that they already have. So overall, it was a solid offseason. They didn't do anything crazy or splashy, but they did have one really good move by drafting White, and then the rest of the stuff was just solid. So again, solid offseason. As we look now at the depth chart for this team, the starting lineup is really good. You've got White, Lavine, Porter Jr., Lauri, and then Carter Jr. as well. And then coming off the bench, you've got Thaddeus Young, Satoransky, Kris Dunn, and Chandler Hutchinson, and some other guys you could throw in there if you'd like to. But in terms of being a legit good team in the East, I do think depth could be an issue here. Thaddeus Young, Dunn, and Satoransky should be good, but after that, it's a bit of a question mark. And fortunately, they do have some positional flexibility with guys like Young and Dunn and Porter Jr. being able to play up or down a few positions, and their depth really isn't awful, but if we're pointing out flaws outside of their obvious dependence on youth, I would say that depth is certainly one of them. Being able to get through a long NBA season and putting out good lineups all season long could be an issue to the Bulls, whether it be because of injuries or just because certain guys don't pan out as well as they hope that they will. Another issue that they could potentially have here is definitely defense. The starters really only have 2 good defenders in Porter Jr. and Carter Jr., and the rest are at best below average. And although some of the bench guys should be better, like Young and Dunn, overall positive defensive contributors are likely going to be difficult to find and make it difficult to win games throughout the season. Moving on now, let's talk about some players to watch. The first one is someone that I briefly mentioned earlier, and that is Kris Dunn. And personally, I haven't been a big fan of him as a starting caliber NBA point guard basically since he arrived in Chicago, just based off how poorly his rookie season went in Minnesota and just some of the context of that and of his game. And I've been crushed in the comment section and on Twitter by Bulls fans for this take a ton over the last year and a half or 2 years, but I've continued to stick by it. And basically my issue is I recognize that Dunn has value on the defensive end and that he's made improvements as a playmaker, but his shooting and scoring struggles continue to bring down his overall value. On a team like Chicago with really skilled offensive players like Markkanen and Lavine, and to a certain extent Porter, you aren't going to want to let a subpar creator like Dunn handle the ball often in place of those guys, which means he needs to be able to shoot to space the floor for those other players, and he just simply can't do that. That's kind of inarguable at this point because the Bulls are clearly starting to lose faith in him as well by bringing in both White and Satoransky this offseason. So why is he a player to watch? Well, because I wouldn't be surprised to see him become trade fodder or just buried near the end of the bench for the Bulls this season. He will pretty much always get minutes because they do need good bench players, but maintaining his confidence in a reserve role could be tough, so just keep an eye on how he handles his new situation. Moving on now, let's talk about some expectations for the Chicago Bulls. And for me personally, even though I've outlined plenty of positive things in this video, I'm not expecting them to be a true playoff contender. And again, this might be a bit of a surprise because everybody likes to think that the East is incredibly weak and it'll be easy to get in, but look at the standings from last year before you just throw every bad team in the East from a year ago into contention for the 8th seed. The Sixers, Celtics, Pacers, and Bucks will all be near the top of the standings so long as they don't suffer major injuries, and even though the Raptors will fall off a bit without Kawhi, they should still be a playoff team, while the Nets should make it as well, and I'd personally feel more confident in the Magic making the playoffs again than the Bulls making a big jump and getting in this year, which just leaves one spot left. And the Pistons certainly could make it back in after making it last year, but the bigger threat to me here is the Miami Heat and Jimmy Butler. I'd be shocked if they don't make the playoffs if they remain healthy, so it's just tough for me to put the Bulls in over them or the Magic or the Raptors. So sorry, Bulls fans, I'm not on the Bulls as a playoff contender bandwagon right now. For my own personal prediction, I do think that they will show some progress this year between 33 to 36 wins, and the possibility still exists for them to get an all-star selection as well, either Zach Lavine or Lauri Markkanen. I understand that it's not the biggest leap in the world, but I do still think it's an important bit of progress for a team that's been sliding down the standings for a couple of years in a row. And there's a reason that I did this season preview today, right after doing the Suns yesterday, because I do think that there's a lot of parallels. I think that some people are going to have expectations that those two teams are going to push for the playoffs this year, and I'm not entirely on that bandwagon, but I also think that they're going to show progress and much needed progress to show that the moves that they've been making with losing all these games the last couple of years and getting high draft picks are actually going to turn into something other than just an on-paper intriguing team. So I do think the Bulls are going to be doing some positive things this year. I believe in some of their young players. I like some of their offseason moves. I'm just not ready to put them in the playoffs over some more established teams in the Eastern Conference, specifically the Raptors, the Magic, and the Heat. That's all I'm saying. Now, having said that, is it possible that a team could experience some injury issues and the Bulls could have maybe a better season than I'm expecting them to and sneak into the playoffs? Yes, of course, that's absolutely possible. These are not 100% concrete things. I'm just saying, as you look at it right now on paper, I'm not expecting or predicting the Bulls to make the playoffs. I'm not going to sit here and say that this team is going to have this injury and these things are going to go great for the Bulls and they're going to slide in. As the teams are currently constructed without injuries being in play at all, and this goes for all the team previews, I'm not expecting them to do these things. I think it's unfair to just say this guy's injury prone or this guy's injury prone. He's not going to play because every single season is different. Things can change very drastically for any teams around the league, whether it be the Bulls or any other team. And so, yes, I definitely think that it's possible that the Bulls could make the playoffs. But right now, I'm not putting them in the playoff contention category in terms of expectations. But having said that, I don't want to make it seem like I'm completely down on the Bulls or I think they're an awful team. I actually think they're moving in the right direction for the first time in a while. I wasn't a huge fan of the Porter trade at the time, but now it makes sense. They don't really have very much cap space moving forward, which is going to be an issue. So they're really going to need these young players to develop. So I definitely think that they're doing some good things, and people like to just kind of construe these as, oh, he hates the Bulls because he doesn't think that they're going to make the playoffs. That's not true. I do think that they're making progress and they're making some of the correct moves. I'm just not all in on them this season. That's all. I think that's an important distinction. But there you have it. That is going to be the end of today's video, and I thank you all very much for watching. Once again, my name is Tucker. If you missed any of my previous videos, then be sure to check out the boxes on screen. Thanks again, and I'll see you all next time.